Captain Miranda Hayes stepped through the familiar front door of her childhood home, carrying a weathered canvas duffel bag that contained the remnants of an 8-year military career. 3 combat tours had transformed her into someone her family refused to recognize, and a collection of commendations represented sacrifices they would never understand or acknowledge. The living room felt smaller than she remembered, cramped with the same outdated furniture and family photos that deliberately excluded any images from her military service. Her mother, Patricia, glanced up briefly from the kitchen counter where she was mechanically chopping vegetables for dinner. The acknowledgement lasted exactly 2 seconds, a perfunctory nod that carried all the warmth of a business transaction. "So you're back," Patricia said, without looking up again. "I suppose you'll want your old room, but we've been using it for storage. The guest room will have to do." Her father, Robert Hayes, remained firmly planted in his worn leather recliner, eyes locked on the evening news broadcast. He didn't bother turning his head when she entered, offering the same level of courtesy he might show to an unwelcome door-to-door salesperson. The deliberate snub stung more than Miranda had expected. "What's the plan now?" Robert muttered without moving his gaze from the television screen. "Are you going to ask the mayor to organize another little parade like you expected when you left?" Miranda stood awkwardly in the hallway where she had once run as a child, still wearing her standard-issue military boots that had carried her through situations her family couldn't begin to imagine. She felt like an unwelcome stranger in the house where she had grown up, invisible despite occupying physical space in their world. Her decorations a Bronze Star earned for valor during a medical evacuation under hostile fire, an Army Commendation Medal for leadership during a crisis operation, and a combat action badge that represented direct engagement with enemy forces, remained carefully secured in the front compartment of her duffel bag. She had learned long ago to keep them hidden during family visits. "You worked in logistics." "Support," Robert added with obvious dismissal, finally turning to face her with an expression that mixed disappointment and irritation. "You weren't infantry. You weren't in real combat situations. Don't pretend you single-handedly saved the entire country." Patricia contributed to the hostile atmosphere by clearing her throat meaningfully. "Your cousin Brandon spent 18 months maintaining communications equipment overseas during his deployment. He never came home expecting special recognition or community celebrations." The comparison revealed how fundamentally her family misunderstood her service record and the nature of her actual responsibilities during deployment. Miranda had coordinated life-saving medical evacuations, maintained critical communications under enemy fire, and led teams through situations that would have broken civilian minds. But she had never engaged in self-promotion or demanded recognition for her achievements. Her younger brother Danny walked past her in the narrow hallway, barely acknowledging her presence. "Oh, the military thing again. I thought you had finally given up on that phase and were ready to get a real job." No family member offered to help carry her belongings upstairs. No one expressed interest in her experiences or asked about the missions that had earned her the respect of career soldiers and commanding officers. Not one person inquired about her future plans or showed concern for the transition challenges that every veteran faces when returning to civilian life. Miranda carried her duffel bag to the guest bedroom, not her childhood room, which had been converted into storage space for items her parents considered more important than preserving a space for their daughter's occasional visits. She placed her gear quietly beside a bed that felt foreign despite being in the house where she had grown up. Outside the window, her father resumed mowing the lawn with the same methodical attention he had always given to maintaining neighborhood appearances. Inside, a woman who had saved lives under enemy fire stood invisible and unrecognized in her own family home, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake coming back to a place that had never felt like home. The silence that followed would prove to be the calm before a storm that none of them could have anticipated. The Hayes family had never demonstrated respect for military service, viewing it as an unnecessary disruption to the practical business of maintaining steady employment and avoiding complications that might draw unwanted attention from neighbors or government authorities. Robert had always maintained that real service to your country means paying your taxes on time, keeping your head down, and not causing problems for people who are trying to live normal lives. During Miranda's 8 years of service, he had consistently characterized her military deployment as a taxpayer-funded vacation that allows people to avoid real responsibility while pretending to be important. When her name was featured prominently in her unit's official newsletter for successfully leading an emergency evacuation operation during a catastrophic flooding emergency that had saved dozens of civilian lives, Patricia never mentioned the recognition or expressed any pride in her daughter's achievements. Throughout her military career, Miranda had sent letters home describing her experiences after her first successful mission coordination, after receiving promotion to captain, after the night she performed emergency medical treatment on a critically wounded soldier while under hostile fire until medevac helicopters could reach their position. Not one letter had ever received a response. She had initially assumed that her family simply didn't know how to respond to descriptions of experiences that existed far outside their civilian understanding of daily challenges and professional responsibilities. But as months passed without acknowledgement, she began to suspect that they weren't interested in learning about her life or achievements, preferring to maintain their preconceived notions about military service rather than confronting evidence that challenged their assumptions. What caused her the deepest pain wasn't their silence about her accomplishments. It was their active effort to rewrite her service record in conversations with extended family members and neighborhood acquaintances. Miranda tried that military experiment for a while, her aunt had explained to curious neighbors during a recent family gathering. But it didn't work out for her, so she came home early before completing her commitment. This revision of her 8-year service record into a brief, unsuccessful experiment demonstrated how thoroughly her family had rejected her actual achievements in favor of a narrative that aligned with their existing worldview about military service and women's capabilities. Now, permanently home after sustaining injuries that had ended her military career and facing the challenges of transitioning to civilian employment, they discussed her future prospects as if she were a college dropout who needed guidance about basic life decisions. Miranda never raised her voice to correct their misstatements or defended her service record against their casual dismissal. She didn't interrupt family conversations to provide accurate information about her responsibilities or achievements during deployment. Instead, she continued to demonstrate the military values that had defined her service, helping her mother with grocery shopping without being asked, raking leaves in the backyard during her free time, and maintaining the same disciplined approach to daily tasks that had earned her respect from commanding officers and fellow soldiers. She remained a soldier in everything except uniform, carrying herself with the same professional bearing and commitment to service that had characterized her military career, even though her own family refused to recognize or acknowledge these qualities. The contrast between the respect she had earned from strangers in uniform and the dismissal she received from people who had known her since childhood created a profound sense of isolation that was more challenging than any mission she had faced during combat deployment. But Miranda didn't know that someone had been watching, someone who understood exactly what she had sacrificed and exactly what she deserved. 3 weeks after her return, the casual dismissal escalated into something more deliberate and cruel. The Hayes family decided to host their traditional backyard barbecue, a neighborhood gathering that had become an annual tradition, designed to maintain social connections and demonstrate their commitment to community involvement. Extended family members arrived throughout the afternoon. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and longtime family friends from their church congregation who had known Miranda since childhood but had little understanding of her military service or current circumstances. Miranda helped arrange folding chairs, distribute paper plates, and ensure that guests had everything needed for a comfortable afternoon. But she was never formally introduced to people who hadn't seen her in several years. Her name was mentioned only in passing, usually in the context of explaining why she was temporarily living at home rather than maintaining her own residence. During one particularly uncomfortable moment, her Uncle Kevin approached her while she was refilling the beverage cooler and asked with obvious skepticism, "So what exactly are your plans now? Are you waiting for some kind of government job at the DMV? Or are you finally ready to find real employment in the private sector?" "I'm still waiting for my final security clearance review to be completed," Miranda responded with the same patient professionalism that had characterized all her family interactions. Kevin laughed dismissively, his amusement clearly based on assumptions about bureaucratic inefficiency rather than any understanding of the complex security protocols that surrounded her military specialization. Must not have been doing anything very important if they can't even figure out where to place you in their own system. He concluded with the confidence of someone who had never worked in any field that required security clearances. But the breaking point came when Patricia began telling the gathered neighbors about Miranda's unsuccessful military phase, while Miranda stood within earshot, arranging dessert plates on the picnic table. She spent a few years playing soldier. Patricia explained to Mrs. Johnson from down the street, her voice carrying across the backyard with deliberate volume. But it didn't really work out. She came back home because she couldn't handle the pressure. You know how some girls think. They can do men's work, but reality catches up eventually. The words hit Miranda like physical blows. 8 years of service reduced to playing soldier. A medical discharge due to injuries sustained while saving lives dismissed as couldn't handle the pressure. A gender used as an explanation for imagined failure. Robert joined the conversation, nodding sagely as he flipped burgers on the grill. We tried to tell her that military service wasn't the right path for someone like her. She should have focused on getting married and settling down instead of chasing fantasies about being some kind of war hero. Miranda excused herself from the gathering and walked inside the house, ostensibly to refill her water glass, but actually to escape the accumulating weight of casual cruelty disguised as family concern. She stood at the kitchen window, looking out at people who claimed to love her while systematically destroying her sense of self-worth and accomplishment. For the first time since returning home, Miranda felt something crack inside her chest. Not the familiar ache of disappointment, but something sharper and more dangerous. The composed military bearing that had sustained her through combat zones and family dismissal began to fracture under the weight of deliberate humiliation. She had survived enemy fire, coordinated life-saving missions, and earned the respect of career soldiers. She had led teams through impossible situations and maintained her integrity under pressures that would have broken most people. But standing in her childhood kitchen, listening to her mother explain to neighbors why she was a failure, Miranda realized that some battles couldn't be won with patience and professionalism. As she stood there, processing the depth of her family's disrespect, she heard a familiar sound in the distance, the low-frequency rumble of diesel engines operating in synchronized coordination. Heavy tires designed for tactical operations, rolling across residential asphalt. The unmistakable mechanical signature of military vehicles approaching in formation. Miranda set down her water glass, her training immediately recognizing the sound pattern. But this couldn't be what it seemed. Like, not here. Not now. The rumbling grew louder, more distinct, more impossible to ignore. The sound of approaching vehicles grew more distinct, and Miranda felt her pulse quicken with a recognition that went deeper than conscious thought. She had heard that exact formation pattern hundreds of times during her service, the synchronized diesel engines, the measured pace that indicated official business rather than casual transportation, the mechanical precision that could only come from extensive military training. But this was impossible. She was in suburban Ohio, not on a military base. There was no reason for a convoy to be operating in her neighborhood, especially not with the kind of coordination that suggested a planned operation. Miranda stepped through the front door onto the porch, her movement catching her father's attention. Robert looked up from the barbecue grill with obvious irritation, his face already forming the expression he reserved for situations that might reflect poorly on the family's neighborhood reputation. "Now what kind of disturbance is this supposed to be?" he demanded, his voice carrying the assumption that whatever was happening would somehow be Miranda's fault and would embarrass them in front of their guests. The first Humvee appeared around the corner of their residential street, moving with the measured pace that Miranda recognized from countless official ceremonies and formal inspections. The vehicle's appearance sent a ripple of confusion through the backyard gathering as neighbors paused their conversations and turned to watch, something unprecedented in their quiet suburban environment. A second military vehicle followed, then a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, creating a convoy that was unlike anything their neighborhood had ever witnessed. The vehicles were immaculate, freshly cleaned, and detailed to the standard required for official ceremonies and formal presentations. Miranda's training kicked in as she automatically assessed the convoy's composition and purpose. These weren't training exercises or routine transportation. The precision of the formation, the ceremonial condition of the vehicles, and the coordinated timing of their arrival indicated something far more significant. Behind her, the backyard gathering had fallen completely silent. Neighbors throughout the gathering had dropped their paper plates and abandoned their conversations as they recognized that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some of the older men, veterans of previous conflicts, had straightened their postures and adopted the unconscious bearing that military training never completely erases. The Humvees parked in perfect formation along the curb in front of the Hayes residence, their positioning demonstrating the kind of precision that comes from extensive military training and coordinated planning. Each vehicle was exactly the same distance from the curb, aligned with mathematical precision that could only be achieved through careful coordination and practice. Vehicle doors opened simultaneously, the sound of 6 doors closing in unison, creating a single sharp report that echoed across the neighborhood. Miranda held her breath as uniformed soldiers emerged with ceremonial efficiency, every individual wearing full-class dress uniform, the formal military attire reserved for official ceremonies, award presentations, and occasions that demanded the highest level of military bearing and respect. The soldiers moved in synchronized coordination, forming a precise line of uniformed personnel that faced the house where Miranda stood on the front porch. Their movements demonstrated the kind of drill precision that required extensive practice and coordination, suggesting that this ceremony had been planned and rehearsed in advance. Patricia emerged from the house behind Miranda, her face pale as she began to understand that whatever was happening involved her daughter in ways she had never anticipated or understood. Robert stepped forward from the backyard, his confusion evident as he tried to comprehend why military personnel had arrived unannounced at his residence. Danny appeared in the doorway, his mouth slightly open as he processed the evidence that his sister's military career might have been significantly more substantial than their family had ever acknowledged or respected. The formation of soldiers stood at attention, waiting for something that Miranda couldn't yet identify, but instinctively understood would change everything that had come before this moment. Every soldier in the formation raised their right hand to their forehead in perfect military salute, the synchronized movement executed with the precision that Miranda recognized from countless formal ceremonies throughout her military career. The salute held for exactly 30 seconds, long enough for every person at the backyard gathering to understand that they were witnessing a formal military tribute, but brief enough to maintain the dignity and protocol that such recognition demanded. Not one soldier spoke during the entire ceremony. No explanations were offered. No speeches delivered about Miranda's service record or the specific achievements that had prompted this unprecedented demonstration of respect. Their silence carried more weight than any verbal tribute could have provided, communicating through action rather than words in the way that military personnel understood and respected. Miranda's eyes moved across the formation of uniformed personnel, recognizing faces from her unit and understanding that several of these soldiers had traveled significant distances to participate in this spontaneous ceremony. In the center of the formation stood Sergeant First Class Timothy Rodriguez, her former operations leader who had coordinated some of the most challenging missions during their shared deployment. Rodriguez's presence indicated that this gathering had been organized at the highest levels of their unit command structure. As her former direct supervisor, he understood better than anyone the specific nature of her service record and of achievements that had earned her the respect of career soldiers and commanding officers. He maintained his salute while making brief eye contact with Miranda, offering a single, almost imperceptible nod that conveyed years of shared experience and mutual respect that transcended formal military protocol. That tiny gesture communicated more recognition and validation than 8 years of family interactions had ever provided. Behind Miranda, the neighborhood guests who had been listening to her mother's dismissive explanations about her unsuccessful military phase now watched in stunned silence, as uniformed soldiers demonstrated exactly what her service had meant to the people who had served. Alongside her, Mrs. Johnson, who had been receiving Patricia's lecture about Miranda's inability to handle military pressure, found herself witnessing a formal military tribute that contradicted everything she had just been told. Kevin, who had questioned whether Miranda had ever done anything important enough to require security clearances, watched as career military personnel traveled from multiple states to honor her service. The ceremony continued with the same precision that had characterized the convoy's arrival. After exactly 30 seconds, Rodriguez turned and signaled for the formation to return to their vehicles. Every soldier moved in coordinated silence, entering their assigned Humvees with the efficiency that came from extensive training and discipline. Robert stood motionless near the barbecue grill, his face reflecting the struggle to reconcile what he was witnessing with his long-standing dismissal of Miranda's military achievements. For the first time since her arrival home, he appeared to understand that his daughter's service record might have been significantly different from his assumptions. Patricia remained on the porch beside Miranda, her complexion having shifted from pale to ashen as she processed the evidence that she had fundamentally misunderstood her daughter's military career and the level of respect that Miranda had earned from the people who had served alongside her. The convoy pulled away from the curb with the same precision that had characterized their arrival, disappearing around the corner and leaving behind a profound silence that seemed to echo with the weight of what had just occurred. But this was only the beginning. What Miranda didn't know was that her former unit had coordinated something far more significant than a simple salute, something that would ensure her family understood exactly what kind of soldier she had been. After the convoy disappeared around the corner, the profound silence that followed was broken only by the sound of neighbors beginning to applaud spontaneously. Several older men who were veterans of previous conflicts rendered their own informal salutes, recognizing the significance of what military personnel did for each other when official channels failed to provide appropriate recognition. Patricia stood frozen on the porch, her face reflecting a mixture of confusion and dawning realization that everything she had believed about her daughters Military service might have been completely wrong. The casual dismissal that had characterized 8 years of family interactions suddenly seemed inadequate to explain what they had just witnessed. Robert abandoned the barbecue grill and walked toward the house, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty as he struggled to process what uniformed soldiers traveling from multiple locations to honor his daughter might mean about her actual service record. Danny emerged fully from the doorway, his typical dismissive attitude replaced by something approaching awe as he began to understand that his sister's military phase had earned recognition from career soldiers who understood the difference between meaningful service and routine employment. The neighborhood guests who had been receiving Patricia's explanations about Miranda's unsuccessful military career now found themselves witnessing evidence that contradicted everything they had just been told. Conversations resumed slowly, but the tone had shifted from casual dismissal to curious respect. No one asked questions about the specific details of Miranda's service record, or the reasons why her unit had chosen to honor her in such a public manner, because some truths transcend explanation and reveal themselves through actions rather than words. That evening, after the guests had departed and the family had retreated to process what they had experienced, Miranda discovered something that made her breath catch in her throat. Her military decorations had been removed from her duffel bag and placed prominently on her bed in the guest room. The medals had been carefully polished until they gleamed, arranged with obvious respect for their significance and what they represented. Someone had entered her room, found her carefully hidden commendations, and displayed them with the honor they deserved, but had never received in her family home. Beside the medals lay a folded card that hadn't been there when she left for this barbecue. Miranda picked it up with trembling fingers, recognizing the official letterhead of her former unit before she even opened it. The next morning brought a gentle knock on her bedroom door. Patricia stood in the hallway, her posture reflecting a humility that Miranda had never seen from her mother. Gone was the casual dismissal and mechanical efficiency that had characterized their interactions since her return home. "Your unit left this for you," Patricia said softly, her voice carrying an apology that she didn't know how to express more directly. We found it tucked under the front door this morning." Miranda accepted the card, noting that her mother's hands were shaking slightly as she extended it. Patricia's eyes briefly met Miranda's, and for the first time in 8 years, her mother's expression showed something that might have been respect. Inside the card, written in the disciplined handwriting that characterized military correspondence, was a message that would become more precious to Miranda than any official commendation. "When the world forgets who you are and what you accomplished, we remember. When your sacrifices go unrecognized by people who should know better, we see you. When you need proof that your service mattered, we stand ready to provide it. With respect and gratitude, 117th Sustainment Brigade." But there was more. Attached to the card was a second document that made Miranda's heart stop, a detailed citation explaining exactly why she had been awarded the Bronze Star, written in language that her family would finally be able to understand. The citation attached to the card contained details about Miranda's service that she had never shared with her family, written in clear, direct language that left no room for misinterpretation or dismissal. Captain Miranda Hayes demonstrated extraordinary heroism during Operation Lifeline, coordinating the emergency medical evacuation of 37 civilians and 14 military personnel from a hostile fire zone during catastrophic flooding conditions. Despite being under direct enemy fire for over 4 hours, Captain Hayes maintained communications with multiple aircraft, directed ground operations, and personally administered life-saving medical treatment to critically wounded personnel while coordinating their extraction to safety. The citation continued with specific details about missions that Miranda had described in letters, home letters that had never received responses from her family. During a separate incident, Captain Hayes led a convoy through an active combat zone to deliver critical medical supplies to an isolated forward operating base. When the convoy came under coordinated attack, Captain Hayes organized defensive positions, coordinated air support, and ensured the safe delivery of medical supplies that saved dozens of lives. Her leadership under extreme pressure exemplified the highest standards of military service and personal courage. Patricia read the citation twice, her face growing paler with each detailed description of situations that revealed her daughter's service record to be far more significant and dangerous than anything she had ever understood or acknowledged. Robert examined the document with the careful attention he usually reserved for important financial papers, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement as he processed evidence that contradicted 8 years of assumptions about Miranda's military career. The citation included details about Miranda's medical discharge, not because she couldn't handle the pressure, as Patricia had explained to neighbors, but because she had sustained permanent injuries while shielding wounded soldiers from incoming fire during an evacuation operation. "Why didn't you ever tell us about any of this?" Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miranda looked at her mother with the patient expression that had characterized all their interactions since her return home. "I tried to tell you. I sent letters describing these missions after they happened. I never received any responses, so I assumed you weren't interested in hearing about my experiences." The simple statement carried the weight of 8 years of silence and missed opportunities for understanding. Patricia's face crumpled as she realized that her daughter had been trying to share these experiences all along, and the family had chosen indifference over interest. Danny picked up one of the polished medals from Miranda's bed, examining it with newfound respect. "What's this one for?" he asked, his usual dismissive tone replaced by genuine curiosity. "Army Commendation Medal for leadership during crisis operations," Miranda explained. "I coordinated disaster relief efforts after a major earthquake. We provided emergency medical care and food distribution to over 2,000 civilians." Robert held the Bronze Star, turning it over in his hands as he processed the weight of what it represented. "And this one? Valor Under Fire," Miranda said simply. "For the medical evacuation operation described in the citation." The medals that had remained hidden in her duffel bag suddenly became tangible, evidence of service and sacrifice that her family could no longer dismiss or minimize. Each commendation represented missions where Miranda had risked her life to save others, demonstrated leadership under impossible pressure, and earned the respect of career soldiers who understood the difference between genuine heroism and routine service. But the most significant revelation was yet to come, and it would arrive in a form that would ensure the Hayes family never again questioned the value of Miranda's military service. 2 days after the convoy's visit, Miranda received a phone call from Colonel James Peterson, her former commanding officer, requesting permission to visit her family home for an official presentation ceremony. What followed was a gathering that would permanently change how the Hayes family understood military service and their daughter's place within it. Colonel Peterson arrived with 3 senior officers, all wearing full-dress uniforms and carrying official documentation that explained why Miranda's unit had felt compelled to organize the unprecedented convoy salute. The formal presentation took place in the Hayes family living room, the same space where Miranda had been dismissed as a burden in uniform just weeks earlier. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes," Colonel Peterson began, addressing Miranda's parents with the formality that accompanied official military business. "I'm here to ensure you understand exactly what your daughter accomplished during her service with our unit, and why every soldier who served with her considers it an honor to have known her." He proceeded to read Miranda's complete service record aloud, every mission, every commendation, every example of leadership and courage that had earned her the respect of career military personnel. The detailed recitation took nearly 20 minutes, covering operations and achievements that her family had never heard described or acknowledged. Captain Hayes personally saved 43 lives during combat operations, Colonel Peterson continued. She led teams through situations that broke other soldiers, maintained her integrity under pressures that would have destroyed most people, and demonstrated the kind of leadership that we use as an example when training new officers. Patricia listened with tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the magnitude of what her daughter had accomplished and how thoroughly she had failed to recognize or honor those achievements. The convoy salute that you witnessed, Colonel Peterson explained, was organized by soldiers who wanted to ensure that Captain Hayes received the recognition she deserved from her family and community. Every soldier who participated traveled here on their own time, using their own resources, because they felt it was important for you to understand what kind of person you have living in your home. Robert, who had spent 8 years dismissing his daughter's service as a taxpayer-funded vacation, found himself listening to detailed descriptions of missions where Miranda had demonstrated courage and leadership that he couldn't begin to comprehend. Colonel Peterson concluded the presentation by addressing Miranda directly. Captain Hayes, your unit wants you to know that the respect you earn during your service will follow you for the rest of your life. The soldiers who served with you will always consider you family, and that family extends to your parents and brother as well. As the officers prepared to leave, Colonel Peterson handed Patricia a framed photograph of Miranda in full dress uniform, surrounded by her unit after receiving the Bronze Star. This is how we remember your daughter, he said, and this is how she should be remembered by everyone who claims to care about her. After the officers departed, the Hayes family sat in complete silence, processing the transformation of their understanding about Miranda's military career and their treatment of her since her return home. Patricia was the first to speak. Miranda, I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give. We failed you in every way that mattered. Robert nodded, for once at a loss for the dismissive comments that had characterized his interactions with his daughter. I was wrong about your service. I was wrong about what you accomplished. I was wrong about everything. Danny, who had dismissed his sister's military career as a phase, looked at her with newfound respect and understanding. I'm sorry I never asked you about your experiences. I'm sorry I never listened. Miranda accepted their apologies with the same grace and professionalism that had defined her military service, but she also established boundaries that would govern their future interactions. If you want to be part of my life going forward, you need to understand that my military service was the most important work I've ever done. It defined who I am, and I won't accept anyone minimizing or dismissing those experiences again. The conversation that followed lasted well into the evening, as Miranda finally shared stories about her missions, her soldiers, and the experiences that had shaped her into the person her family was only now beginning to recognize and respect. 6 months later, when Miranda accepted a position as a veterans counselor at the local VA hospital, her family attended the ceremony where she was formally introduced to her new colleagues. Patricia made a point of introducing herself to other attendees as Miranda's mother with obvious pride, and Robert spent the evening asking thoughtful questions about her new role and responsibilities. The guest bedroom was converted back into Miranda's childhood room, with her military decorations displayed prominently on the dresser and her service photographs arranged alongside family pictures that finally acknowledged her 8 years of military accomplishment. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, they're won in living rooms, where patience and dignity eventually overcome ignorance and indifference. Miranda Hayes had survived combat zones and family dismissal with equal grace, proving that a soldier's honor isn't dependent on recognition, but becomes more powerful when that recognition finally arrives. The convoy salute had lasted 30 seconds, but its impact would resonate through the Hayes family for the rest of their lives. ensuring that Miranda's service would never again be questioned, dismissed, or forgotten by the people who should have honored it from the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.